I find it weird. As a kid, I liked fire. It got me in a lot of trouble, but I liked fire. And we burned, you know, the garden waste across the street in an empty lot. And during the war, we had this Bomb of the Month club. Probably put me in prison these days if I did that stuff. But back in World War II, that was acceptable behavior. And sometimes the fires got away from us. One time the fire department was there and they got hold of my mother, who was working in the factories during the war. She came out and the fire marshal said, well, was it Billy or Ken? And my mother said that was the most embarrassing moment in her life up to that point, that the fire marshal knew the names of her children. And that's kind of where my affinity for fire began, at least in my mind. As I got older, you know, I was the one who started the fires, who lit the fire in the fireplace, got the campfire going. Played with fire. And I did a lot of it. And when I finally went to work at the university, they would have social events, particularly around the Christmas season. We'd go to somebody's house and they have a fireplace. They have fire equipment laid out. And then somebody'd sit there and they'd be messing around trying to start a fire. And then somebody else would fool around and start this fire. And then, you know, somebody else would come around and try and figure, because it kept going out. And then finally somebody would say, Christina, well, would you get the fire going? And I would go over and get a fire going and just go, you know. And I didn't think it was special. It just was one of the things that I did. You know, I could build a fire. Nobody taught me anything about it. Then I got to small boys camp the first time, and I'm actually with Indians in the bush. And it was quite funny that I was starting the fires because the women do all the fires in Cree country, the hearth fires. The men only make a fire when they're preparing for a sweat lodge or they're going out on a hunting trip and they're going to be gone for days. They light fires, campfires. But they had not seen a guy who had an affinity for building fires and just did it. I didn't think anything about it. And years later, I received the name ksitew. And ksitew is, in English, it's warm fire. But it's also the fire in the center of the sacred circle and the entrance to the seventh path. And it's the spirit of relationship and transformation. So, you know, I've followed the inward path now for a long time, but the fire is the gate because it transforms. And traditionally that's, you know, we all know fire turns wood to ash and it hardens steel and it does all kinds of things. It transforms. And in the inward path is the gate. That's where you transform from your ego to your spirit. That's where the medicine people go to do their ceremonies, sun dances and tobacco lodges and shaking tents and those kinds of things. So I have an affinity for fire. And I thought, they don't see it in terms of air, water, earth, fire. Those are Greek terminology and concepts for the basic elements of the building of all things. But since people asked about fire, I thought, well, let's talk about fire or whatever you have an affinity for. And with that, I'll put the stick back in.
Hmm. 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 Well, this is a Hoan. I'll pick up the stick. I am right there with you. I, excuse me, have an affinity for fire. It was one that now I understand. Thank you for your sharing. It is one that I knew I really liked fire, but while I was married, I wasn't allowed to play with the fire. I didn't know anything about fire. So my husband said. And well, today is my spiritual birthday. So, 14 years ago, I kind of stepped onto my path. And that was one of the first things I wanted to do. I wanted to have a fire and take control, so to speak, of the fire pit that was in the back. A lot of gasoline and different things was used by my ex-husband to start fires. And there was just something inside of me that felt, that's just, use it if you have to in a desperate situation, but that's not the way it's done. Well, when my ex left, that's exactly what I did. I began having fires in the pit, and I called it a transformation pit. I would put things into the fire to have it transformed. It was a symbolic of letting it go and allowing it to be transformed and into something else. And I absolutely, it would have drumming ceremonies and be dancing around the fire. And I was like, wow, this is really, really sweet. And then I was introduced to sweat lodges, and over the course of the journey became the fire keeper. And then over the course of the journey, I was trained as a fire walk facilitator. And fire is, it has no mercy. It doesn't matter who you are. You play with fire, you may or may not get burned. The possibility is there, but you will get burned. And for me, it is a on the physical sense, it is, letting go. It burns off everything that is kind of no longer needed, and allows for fertile growth, sparks seeds for new things to grow. When I think of fire and a medicine wheel, I think of that spark, that passion, that fire in the belly that gets you going type of thing. Yeah, that spirit passion, your desire, that thing that calls your heart and keeps you going, and you forget about time and space. It's what you're there. That's that passion. That's what I think of with fire. So with that, I will turn the stick in.
Okay. Mary, you look like you want to say something.
Oh, yeah. I don't know what that look is, but you're right. I was just remembering, you know, how some wonderful times in my life when I did some camping up in the Rocky Mountains and, you know, walked very high up, and I had a wonderful boyfriend that was very experienced in living outdoors. So we spent a lot of time in the wilderness, and I just really enjoyed making fires a lot. And I wound up being the person that cooked and, you know, tended the fires, and we, you know, we did a lot of cooking and foraging. And so I just loved the whole process of finding kindling and keeping the fire going and attending to it. And it's something that's kind of fallen by the wayside in my life. So that will be a goal, I guess you could say, or a, you know, something I would like to come back to, you know, is creating fires. Mostly my fires were small. You know, the idea was I was cooking something long and slow, you know, not creating some kind of huge blaze, you know, kind of huge showy blaze, but starting, you know, with small kindling and feeding larger sticks and making something that was going to keep going over time. So that's, whoops. You know, that's a very happy memory. I think really one of the last fires I had was with you, Ahawan, on the, was that it? When was that? Could not have been, it was the moon. That's what it was. So I guess I'm complete with that. Thank you. Are you doing okay?
I just need to get some coffee. It's heating.
Ah.
I can hear and speak.
Oh.
With the headphones, I heard everything you said.
Oh, okay, good.
And I mute it so that you don't hear the microwave when I open the door and close the door. Yeah.
Okay.
It's interesting, you know, fire is not just big. You burn sweetgrass, for example. Now, braids in Cree country are mind, body, spirit, and the strands, have a certain number of grass in each one that have certain symbolisms. But the fire transforms the sweetgrass and the smudge into smoke. That's what the fire does, right? And then that carries the cleansing and the prayers. The same thing is true of the fire in the bowl of tobacco in a pipe. You know, it converts the tobacco to smoke, and your prayers are sent to the great mystery. Who's next? I've got to go to the microwave and get my hot cup of coffee.
Well, I can go next. Okay. So let me just do one thing. It's very interesting for me that we're talking about fire, because that has somehow been a conversation this week. We were talking with others who also do ceremony, and we were talking about how fire may have played into our past lives, or at least some memories which we had. But what I remember is, just like Kisitwa was talking about his childhood, that as a child, I loved making fires, special fires, and I always felt that and I would take old school books with empty paper and burn those. And I remember my sister and I would do this and think that, well, if we should, somehow we had the feeling that maybe the grown-ups won't like us doing it. But it was almost like something we just had to. And I remember thinking later how foolish we were, that we would do this just beside a hedge. And if the hedge had caught fire, we would have had something like the burning bush. But that actually is something that reminds me of two things that I think about fire as a metaphor. One, as our one was saying, it removes the toxins, it removes things which no longer serve us. Another way, as you were saying, Kisitwa, that it also, we burn sacred things in it to transform them into a smudge. We can give prayer ties into it, and that makes them into a prayer. At the same time, we can also feel that passion. So fire doesn't always burn away. It becomes something which keeps us alive. And actually that is one of the ways in which in India, and I think many who speak of all the elements that we were talking, that you mentioned earlier, Kisitwa, that's how they talk about fire. All of us have that element of fire within us. In some places they'll say that it's in the heart. The fire is in the small intestine, which helps you to absorb the food that you have eaten. So at a very physical level, fire is within us and we need it. And right now in my life, it's very interesting for me that the very element which I have been so close to all my life is what has become a little less than it needs to be. And so I'm working physically to bring it back. I think it's there in my mind, it's there in my consciousness, but it went away from my body because I was overdoing many things in my life. So it's very interesting to see the different ways in which fire is playing in my life. And one very interesting ceremony that I learned last year is called Agnihotra, which is a sacred fire. Kisitwa saw that copper pyramid in which it's made when he came here. You burn cow dung, which is considered very pure and sacred. And the smoke of it is extremely fragrant and pure. And when it goes out into the atmosphere, it cleanses it of any toxins. And it can spread around 10 miles from wherever you're making the fire. So you make the fire every every sunrise and sunset at the exact time at when it is sunrise and sunset at your address, at your place, which is always a little bit different from one place to another. And it's a very peaceful way of waking up in the morning to greet the sun. And I don't do it every day, but sometimes I do it in sessions of 21 days or something like that. So that's what I wanted to share about fire. Thank you for starting this, Kisitwa. Warm fire, very special warm fire in our lives. He has taught us many things. I hand the talking stick back.
I would add a couple of items that you reminded me of. I mean, fire was our first light after the sun, you know. That's what we lit to see and to keep warm. And the Cree used buffalo chips for fire, okay, in the plains, because the plains have no trees. There's no tree at all. So they used, when they were hunting buffalo, they would use buffalo chips, just like you use cow chips I don't know whether it's fragrant or not because I never was in or around one of those fires, but I know they spoke of it often that that was what they would use when they went into the prairies to hunt buffalo, was buffalo chips. It's also, you know, interesting that the Japanese just a few years back discovered that the human body emits light, literally, chemically, physically, actual visible light. The difficulty is for most people that there's so few photons being emitted that we don't observe it. We don't see it. But they've done experiments. I posted them in our one of our groups on Facebook where, you know, in a light darkened room where it's completely sealed off from light, they have a special camera and they can photograph the human body glowing with this with visible light spectrum, not just infrared heat. Light's also often associated with awakening. So, and with soul. I mean, there's a lot of spiritual, not even, but in Christianity, for example, they'll say things like, you know, don't hide your light in the bushel, you know, in the basket, let your light shine. Those are real phenomena that I think we all took as allegories for a long time. And I actually noted in the thing I posted that I think your camera actually catches that sometimes. I see your photographs that have light around the people that you're photographing. Oh. Teresa, what's with you and fire or your affinity for something? You have a great affinity for a car. Where did Daisy go?
What did you say? I had an affinity for what? I didn't hear what he said.
Your car.
Car. Oh, you consider the car fire? I never thought of that. Interesting. I remember being in the Boy Scouts once and I told the fire to get really, really big. And I just wanted to see if it would. And darn it, didn't that Boy Scout leader told the people to throw all the vegetable oil in the fire?
Oh no.
And it got huge. And sometimes I think fire might be able to hear you. I think there might be something to that. There might be a spirit there.
Well, there used to be a lot of kidding. If you were in your younger years and sitting around a campfire and the smoke would drift your way, there were a lot of innuendos made about your sex life or your love life.
Wow.
So, well, you missed those. This is, you know, fire is so important. And the things associated with fire are important. For example, in a teepee, there's always a fire circle of stones to keep the fire in bounds. But there's one stone for every resident of that teepee around the circle. And you can sit there and count the people that is a home for, whether they're actually there or not, by the number of stones in the circle. And of course, the stones get hot and they help keep the teepee warm. One of my teachers, Mel Paul, had a teepee about 30 yards from his house. They had a house. Indian Affairs insisted he have a house. But every winter he moved into the teepee because the grandchildren came to live in his house during the winters. and he couldn't stand the noise.
Oh my gosh.
And so he would move out into his teepee. And so I spent a lot of time in a teepee in the winter talking with him. He blessed my first pipe. He's a wonderful guy. I went hunting with him and multiple times. But I would guess that the teepee with a fire in it, not a raging fire, but they have skirts inside. I don't know if you've ever seen it, the inside of a real teepee. But in addition to the outer skins, nowadays it's canvas, they have a skirt on the inside that drops down. And it starts about waist high and then goes down. And they keep things they want to store in cold between the skirt and the teepee, outer wall of the teepee. And it also stays warm. And my guess is, just having been in the teepee a lot in the winter, it was probably mid 40s to 50 degrees when it's 40 minus outside. They're not cold. They're colder than 72 that I've got my thermostat set for. But they're not cold the way you would think they might be in minus 40 degree weather. They're at least no lower than minus 40. If the fire goes out, though, the water that you have, because there's always some water in the teepee, will freeze. And you'll have to break it up in the morning to make coffee or tea or whatever. But yeah, fire's got a lot of meanings, spiritual meanings, physical, this world meanings, metaphysical meanings. And I think they all make sense of a kind, I try and imagine what it must have been like for the first humans to see a lightning strike set a fire and realize that they could use that. It's amazing. And that memory is carried through in our myths and stories and religions about fire and spirit. Nobody knows where Daisy went. She didn't say anything. Guess it wasn't her cup of tea.
We can never know, because sometimes it's just that the internet doesn't work or something else.
Yeah. We actually had ours go out this afternoon in the middle of streaming something on television. I have our internet provider on speed dial on my smartphone.
I feel that's also something that we all always co-create, that when something happens that we don't know, what meaning do we put on it?
Indeed. Good point. So has anybody got an affinity for something other than fire? I mean, I actually have an affinity for
water. Water.
Yes.
Yes. For me, it is, you light that passion, you get that fire going, and sometimes you have to tone it down just a little bit and cool it off. It makes a nice little balance. Yeah, and well, you have to stay hydrated. Water has a lot of meanings in itself. Kind of going with that flow.
Emotion.
Some refer to it as liquid love. We all need it. Every being, including trees and plants, we all need water. It's the makeup. It kind of is that glue that holds everything together. Every single cell. So yes, I have an affinity for water as well. You got to have the balance. I'll turn the stick in.
Yeah, I have an affinity for all of them, although fire was probably the first one that I played with. But I've told most of you, the story of riding the wind when I was very young, sneaking out at night and going into a foxhole, which is an affinity for earth. To go into the earth and be covered. And of course, I was a competitive swimmer, so water's kind of related its own way. And I liked canoeing and rafting on rivers and swimming in the ocean. But fire's the one that I ended up with as the most important of the four. And I have no idea why, except maybe, and I'm just trying to figure out my own life here. It's led me to the inner path. And for me, that's, well, that's the path I'm on. For the moment, that's for the last, since I got my name and maybe even before that. So as a life path, the fire was just the entrance to the inner path. And I think there's a lot to be said for its similarity to being a clean bone, where you set your ego aside. The fire burns it out, but it also can be just set aside. We have that choice of parking our egos for a while and letting spirit just flow through us. And that's the meaning of being a clean bone or a hollow bone in Indian country. Medicine people use it all the time. It's like you don't do the ceremonies. The ceremonies just help you let spirit flow through you so that the spirit can do the healing work and the prayer work and that sort of stuff. I've always been attracted to Black Elk's statement, paraphrased, something like, it's not I who does the healing, it's the Great Spirit. And if I were to claim that I was doing the healing, it would make a mockery of everything I've done. And I think that's a lesson for every Reiki practitioner, every preacher and minister, every doctor. And that's really what Meenakshi was asking me to do, to remind people when they came into the meeting, to kind of park your ego aside. And to the extent you can, let spirit speak through you. And with that, I'll put the stick back. And I actually have a stick.
One of my feelings is it depends on how we are looking, because words can't really express the relationship that we may feel between spirit or the Great Spirit, God, whatever we call the Creator Spirit, and us. Because in a way, the greatest ego is to think that we are separate from the Great Spirit. Because we aren't separate. There's nothing else but the Creator. And but because like we say in Reiki, as you were saying, and in all healing actually, that we are the facilitators, that it is the healing that flows through, and not only through the person who is being the practitioner or the healer, but also the person who is being healed. Each of us is actually our own healer. And sometimes we just need another aspect of us, who we call the healer, to come and help us. So in a way, it's all the same. It's just different facets of the same.
Yeah, I wouldn't disagree with that. I mean, if we're really all one, you know, the healer and the healed are the same. This is said over and over again. You know, the giver gives but to themselves, and I think that's easier to say than it is to experience the reality of that.
You know, when you experience it, ksitew, you experience it as a mother for sure. I think some fathers do as well. I remember every time, my mother used to say this when we would eat. And we'd say, "You're not eating." And she would say, "When you eat, my stomach gets full." So she told me one day that I was eating, and I'm looking at her and I'm saying, "Is your stomach full?" And she started laughing. It's like I was doing her a favor by eating.
Aww.
But when I became a mother, I realized that, you know, I'll feel hungry. I'll go into the kitchen and then I'll suddenly start thinking of everyone else who needs to be fed. And by the time they're fed, my hunger has gone. So I think that's also true, you know, that interrelationship, that interconnection is something we actually do feel. Maybe we are told so many things about being individual. We're given a name and so many other things that we forget it. But when we are just relaxed, we actually feel that oneness. That's my feeling. And actually, I feel that a lot of our pain is because it's just our forgetting. Like when we say, "Oh, I give a lot," but whom are you giving to? You're not giving to the small self. You're giving to the self. That's that memory or that understanding. It just takes a moment, and then I think you feel it.
We had a related conversation about this Wednesday with my family. It's like I think most of you know I went a long time without eating at all for 4 months, and I was talking about how angry it made my mother. I mean, it really upset her. My wife and I neither one had been eating, and we were traveling through California, and I went to see a cousin, and then I went to see my mom. Of course, she wanted to cook for us, and she wanted to take us out to supper. We were not eating, right? And she was furious. And this was furious beyond thinking we were absolutely out of our minds, right? But it was the thing of she could not express love without feeding us and nurturing us. You know? And it just threw her for a loop. And I must say that I wasn't quite so sure what to do either, you know, because once their mom mad at them, I didn't think we were doing anything wrong, but there it was. She had surrendered her sovereignty over her emotions to me and my wife and was angry because we wouldn't eat. I did not perceive that from the position you just expressed, that I can see how that would relate to what I experienced. I didn't experience my mother's direct feelings about it. I just knew she just was overtly angry, but I didn't think about it in the terms that you just expressed. And it makes a lot of sense for that to have been the case. She just literally, how do you love your kids if you don't feed them? You know? And she didn't have an answer to that question for herself. Well, we're at 8 o'clock. Any last words? Anyone like to summarize things? Mary?
This has been lovely. I appreciate everyone's insight and their willingness to reveal, you know, the inner fire.
Mm-hmm.
And the wonderful kind of ending with the mother, you know, the mother archetype feeding the children. I remember feeling that with my children and spending so much of my time cooking for them and shopping for them, and how important that was. So, you know, just thank you for all the sharing.
Mm-hmm. Go on.
Well, there was something that I had thought about sharing that has come to me, and that is that that the one thing that I can relate to when you were sharing, Meenakshi, is that oneness where someone is eating and you're getting filled up. I recall being a part of a vision quest in Dothan, Alabama, and I was the fire keeper. And the one thing the facilitator of the vision quest had shared is for us to eat. The person on the vision quest is out there, and there are no water, no food for it was 3 days. Her vision quest was 3 days, and we kept the sacred fire going. We kept the fire in the teepee going, and so forth. But the one instruction was, please eat, and she will feel full out there in the field, and it will give her strength and keep her going. And so, yeah, and then I remember her coming back and sharing how she didn't have the hunger pains, and she felt full most of the time. And when she would feel it, she would call out, and then very soon would feel very full and have the strength to continue on.
Mm-hmm.
That's the only thing that I feel that I wanted to share was now. Oh, one more other thing. When you were talking about children, I personally have never had children, but I operated a canine bed and breakfast, and I had dog kids. I still have dog kids. And I have noticed that I have gone back and forth. There are times where it's, oh yeah, you've got to feed the kids first and then eat. And then in our Western, it is no, the alpha always eats first and you feed the dogs second. So I find myself going back and forth between those two philosophies or beliefs periodically with the kids. And I'll toss the stick back in with that. That's all I have to share.
I will say at a feast that the kids eat last. The kids serve and take care of the elders, and the non-elder adults take care of themselves. But the kids serve the elders. It's quite touching, you know.
Interesting.
There's usually a big table, you know, like I lost the word. Anyway,
that would be very
the kid would be introduced to you when you arrive if you're not from the community, and then we're talking about tweens here, 10, 11, 12 kids ages, and they would escort you to your seat, show you where to sit, and then they would ask you what you wanted for food, and then they would go in the line and get the food for you, and then they would come back and ask you what you wanted to drink, and then they would take care of that. And then they just keep an eye out to make sure that if you ate all of something, they could check and see if you wanted more, if you needed your glass refilled or your cup refilled. And they didn't eat till everybody was done. It's just was remarkable to have children so attentive to your needs in that situation.
Maybe they were fed before.
No. Not
okay.
The grown-ups. Wow.
It doesn't mean they didn't help themselves to things, because nobody would have stopped them, but they didn't get their plates until they finished. Everybody else had eaten.
Well, the day the dogs start serving me, I will let you know.
I really want to see that.
Well, I do too. No, I remember when I was in India in Varanasi, the hostel girls, they would always, it was always the eldest, where she would do all of the cooking. They would, and then the younger ones would help serve, and everybody would have their dishes. And then she would go and take the Madam G, the food. I sat at the table with the kids. I wanted to be one of the kids. They called me Dee Dee. But the madam always was served by the children, which I thought was very, very beautiful and interesting. Now, when I was in the households, it was always the Madam G of the household that did all of the serving.
Yeah.
And it seemed that she ate last. Is that true, Meenakshi? I mean, that's what I observed, and that's common, correct?
The thing is, it's in a personal way, never in any of our families. But yes, I have seen, it may be a very traditional families in villages for sure, definitely. In very small towns, especially where the women are not educated. But actually not only that, I have seen that very traditional families also in South India, that's how they are, that the woman eats last.
Yes.
Yes, definitely not the children. It'll always be the woman of the house, which I find anyway.
Yes, that is very interesting.
I was brought up by very, very revolutionary grandparents and parents. So our families have been very different. But what you're saying is true. That is, I think, the norm even now.
I always said that the cook was taking care of her food, if only through testing, so that by the time it was served.
I don't know about others, but I never taste my food. I never taste when I'm cooking. I never taste it.
Okay, Teresa, you want to say something to wrap up?
About fire? Well, I think we went through a lot. And I think when Mary was talking, I think she was talking about the spirit of relationship being fire. And I think my mom's been through the spirit of transformation and sacrifice. So I think there's lots of spirits and it represents. That's all.
Hey.